Abandon her. We refused to fund the surgery, my father told the doctor as I lay comatose. He then approved the Do Not Resuscitate order, solely for financial gain. Yet, he was oblivious my legal counsel was there, documenting every word. When I awoke, I spoke not a single word. I enacted something far more dreadful, leaving him penniless within 24 hours. Can you even imagine waking up from a coma, barely clinging to life, only to find out your own father signed papers letting you die? Not for medical reasons, not because he loved you, but to steal your inheritance? My blood ran cold when I found out, but what he didn't know. My lawyer recorded every chilling word of his betrayal. And when I finally opened my eyes, I didn't just confront him. Oh no. I orchestrated a downfall so spectacular, it obliterated his $500 million medical empire in exactly 24 hours. Stick around, because this isn't just a story of revenge, it's about choosing justice over everything else. Just a few months before everything exploded, I was sitting at that gleaming mahogany conference table in my father's office. He was Robert Sullivan, head of Sullivan Medical Group, a man who saw hospitals not as places of healing, but as pieces on his personal chessboard. He slid another one of those charity donation forms across to me. The Sullivan Foundation for Medical Innovation, he called it. Sounds noble, right? Until you looked at the books. Just sign it, Fiona, he'd said, not even glancing up from his phone. It's a simple tax write-off. Everyone does it. But I'd spent 10 years as a legal director. I knew money laundering when I saw it, especially when it was wearing a custom-tailored suit and carrying my family name. I can't sign this, Dad, I told him, my voice firm. These transactions, they don't match any legitimate medical research. That's when he first said it. The words that would echo between us for years. You're too soft for this business. Your mother was the same way. Weak. My mother. The woman who built the pharmaceutical empire that funded his entire kingdom before cancer cruelly took her when I was just 22. She'd left me $15 million in a trust fund, locked away until I turned 35. Unless, of course, I became medically incapacitated. Funny how specific legal clauses can become terrifying prophecies. Family dinners became interrogations. Why won't you support the family business? Don't you understand loyalty? My brother, James, the CFO, would sit there, silent, drowning his conscience in expensive whiskey, while our father called me the family traitor. They thought my refusal to cross legal lines made me weak. They mistook my integrity for an inability to see what they were doing. They couldn't have been more wrong. You need to understand the scale of what Robert Sullivan controlled. Sullivan Medical Group wasn't just a hospital network, it was a healthcare empire across New England. 12 hospitals, 3,000 doctors, billions in revenue. My father held 9 board positions. He thought he was untouchable. And the crown jewel? A massive merger with Hartford Healthcare Systems, $500 million that would make him the undisputed king of New England medicine. The announcement was set for March 26th at a grand shareholders meeting in Boston. His coronation. I stayed on as legal director, despite the daily dismissals and public humiliations. She's only here because of nepotism, he'd tell investors while I stood right there. Good thing she inherited her mother's money because she certainly didn't inherit any business acumen. But I stayed because someone needed to document what was happening. Someone needed to be the adult in a room full of entitled children playing with people's lives. The Sullivan Foundation alone had diverted over $40 million in 5 years. I couldn't prove it yet, but I knew. And I knew this merger was his ticket to covering it all up. He had no idea it would become his public execution. Then came March 15, 2024. 8:30 p.m. I was driving home on I-93 after another grueling 16-hour day, cleaning up my father's aggressively negotiated contracts. The rain had just started, that cold, miserable March rain that can't decide if it wants to be snow. I remember seeing the 18-wheeler's headlights suddenly swing into my lane. 2 seconds. That's all I had. 2 seconds to realize everything was about to change forever. The impact sent my Audi spinning, flipping 3 times before slamming into the median. The dashboard camera from the car behind me captured it all. Later, it would prove this wasn't some elaborate insurance fraud, as my father's lawyers would quietly suggest. First responders found me unconscious. Blood pooling from a head wound. Severe traumatic brain injury. They airlifted me to Massachusetts General Hospital, the flagship of my father's network. The irony was absolutely gut-wrenching. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the head of neurology, later noted in my charts, 70% chance of full recovery. Recommend aggressive treatment protocol. My initial prognosis was optimistic. But that's not what my father heard when he finally arrived at the hospital. For hours later. For agonizing hours. It took him 4 hours to drive 20 minutes because he'd stopped to call his lawyers first, then his insurance team, then the board members, assuring them this unfortunate situation wouldn't affect the merger. When he finally walked into that ICU room, he didn't ask if I was in pain. He didn't ask about my chances. He asked Dr. Martinez 3 times about the possibility of a persistent vegetative state and whether my medical power of attorney documents were properly executed. He was already thinking about that trust fund. While machines kept me breathing, while my brain fought to repair itself, Robert Sullivan was calculating the value of his daughter's death. The accident wasn't the betrayal. The accident was just the opportunity he'd been waiting for. What my father didn't know was that Marcus Smith, my personal attorney of 10 years, was already there. Marcus wasn't just my lawyer, he was my insurance policy. 3 years earlier, I'd signed a comprehensive medical advocacy document, giving him the right to be present during any medical decisions if I was incapacitated. It was buried in a stack of routine estate planning papers, filed with the Massachusetts State Bar. My father never knew it existed. Marcus got the call from the hospital just 17 minutes after the accident. Unlike my father, he came immediately. By the time Robert was still on his first conference call with the board, Marcus was already in my ICU room, briefcase in hand. Inside that briefcase was a digital recording device. Massachusetts is a 2-party consent state for recordings, unless one party has given prior written consent for emergency situations. I'd given Marcus that consent years ago, notarized and filed. Another piece of paper my father never knew existed. I positioned myself in the corner of the room, Marcus later told the court. I identified myself to the medical staff as Miss Sullivan's legal advocate. No one questioned his presence. In their world, lawyers in ICU rooms were as common as heart monitors. He sat there for 4 hours, waiting, watching the machines breathe for me, reading my medical charts, speaking with Dr. Martinez, recording everything. The nurses liked him. Dr. Martinez later said he asked about my comfort, about pain management. He cared about the patient, not just the paperwork. Marcus knew what was coming. We discussed it in hypotheticals over a dozen coffees. If something happens to me, my father will come for the money. I'd even joked about it. Marcus wasn't laughing now. He was documenting. Robert Sullivan entered my ICU room at 12:43 a.m., like he was walking into a board meeting. Armani suit still perfectly pressed despite the hour. 2 lawyers flanked him, Mitchell Barnes from corporate and a specialist in estate law, David Cross. Status report, my father demanded of Dr. Martinez. Not, how is she? Not, will she be okay? Just status report. Dr. Martinez, to her credit, maintained her professionalism. Your daughter has sustained significant head trauma, but her neurological responses are encouraging. We're seeing. Percentage chance of full recovery? Robert interrupted, cutting her off. Approximately 70% with aggressive treatment. And without aggressive treatment? The doctor paused. Mr. Sullivan, I'm not sure I understand. It's a simple question, he pressed. What happens if we pursue comfort care only? Marcus pressed record. For the next 20 minutes, my father interrogated Dr. Martinez about brain death criteria, vegetative states, and the cost of various treatment protocols. He asked about my brain function 3 times, but never once asked if I was in pain. He pulled up my medical insurance on his phone, calculating deductibles while I lay there, unhearing, unseen, but somehow still fighting. She has excellent insurance, Dr. Martinez pointed out. The experimental treatments would be largely covered. That's not the point, Robert snapped. He turned to Kraus, the estate lawyer. Pull up the trust documents. They huddled over a tablet, discussing my mother's $15 million trust fund like I was already gone. $15 million, they kept saying. $15 million that could benefit so many others through the Sullivan Foundation. The trust passes to her father if she dies without children or a spouse, Krauss confirmed. But only if she's deceased. Permanent incapacitation maintains her as beneficiary. That's when Robert asked the question that would destroy him. What if she's DNR? What if we decide not to resuscitate if she crashes? Dr. Martinez stiffened. Mr. Sullivan, your daughter is stable. There's no medical indication for a DNR order. I'm her father. I have medical power of attorney. Actually, Marcus said quietly from the corner, speaking for the first time. You don't. The room went silent. My father turned to look at Marcus for the first time, his eyes narrowing. Who the hell are you? Marcus Smith, Miss Sullivan's personal attorney and designated medical advocate. He held up the documentation, filed with the state 3 years ago. I have equal authority in medical decisions while she's incapacitated. That's impossible. I'm her father and I'm her designated advocate. Would you like to see the paperwork? Marcus challenged. Robert's face flushed red. His corporate lawyer, Mitchell Barnes, whispered urgently in his ear, but Robert waved him off. It doesn't matter, Robert declared, recovering quickly. As her father, my wishes should be considered. Of course, Marcus said, utterly calm. Please continue your discussion with Dr. Martinez. I'm just here to observe and ensure Fiona's interests are protected. What happened next was 23 minutes of recorded evidence that would later be played in a room full of shareholders. 23 minutes of my father revealing exactly who he was. Look, Doctor, Robert said, his tone shifting to the voice he used for hostile takeovers. My daughter wouldn't want to live as a vegetable. She's told me many times she values quality of life over quantity. She's not in a vegetative state, Dr. Martinez insisted. Her brain activity shows, but she could be tomorrow, next week. These things deteriorate, don't they? He pulled out his phone, showing her something. I've been reading about similar cases. Families bankrupted by false hope. Millions spent keeping bodies alive when the person is already gone. Mr. Sullivan, your daughter has a 70% chance. Let her go peacefully, Robert said. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. We won't pay for experimental treatments when that money could save the hospital. Think about it. $15 million. Do you know how many pediatric cancer patients that could help? How many families without insurance? Dr. Martinez looked disgusted. Are you seriously suggesting? I'm suggesting we be practical. Realistic. My daughter was always practical. He turned to Krauss. Draw up the DNR paperwork. The doctor needs to sign off on it. No, Dr. Martinez said firmly. I won't sign anything. There's no medical justification. Robert smiled. That cold, boardroom smile I'd seen destroy careers. You're right. You won't sign it. But Dr. Harrison will. He's arriving in an hour. Dr. Harrison. Robert's golf buddy. The one quietly removed from 2 hospitals for ethics violations before Robert gave him a position at Sullivan Medical. This is medical murder, Dr. Martinez said quietly. This is mercy, Robert replied, signing the DNR order that Dr. Harrison would later rubber stamp. Let her go. We won't pay for the surgery. Marcus captured every word. My brother arrived as Robert was signing the papers. James had always been the conflicted one. Smart enough to know what our father was, but weak enough to need his approval anyway. Dad, he stood in the doorway, taking in the scene, lawyers, documents, our father's signature on a death warrant. What's happening? We're making the hard decisions, Robert said without looking up. Someone has to. James moved to my bedside. He touched my hand. The first person in that room to actually touch me like I was still human. The nurses said she's responding well. They said, the nurses aren't doctors. Dad, maybe we should wait. Robert's head snapped up. Wait for what? For her to deteriorate? For the merger to fall apart because the board thinks I can't handle family crisis. He stood, moving close to James. You want to keep your position, don't you? CFO of the new merged entity. I couldn't see James's face, but Marcus described it later. The moment my brother chose his corner office over his sister. She did say once that she wouldn't want to be kept alive artificially, James said quietly. The lie came so easily. I'd never said that. I'd actually said the opposite during one of our rare, honest conversations. See? Robert turned back to Dr. Martinez. Even her brother agrees. But James wasn't done wrestling with his conscience. The trust fund, though. Mom wanted Fiona to have it. Your mother's dead, Robert said flatly. And that money could save the company from the Hartford investigation. Hartford investigation. That was new. Marcus made a note. James signed as a witness to the DNR. Later, he would tell me he'd convinced himself it was temporary, that I'd wake up before anything happened. He'd borrowed $2 million from me just 6 months earlier. Money I'd given him to save his house from foreclosure. Some betrayals cost 30 pieces of silver. Mine cost $2 million and a CFO title. March 18, 2024. 5:47 a.m. I opened my eyes to fluorescent lights and the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. The first face I saw was Dr. Martinez, who actually gasped. Don't try to speak, she said, tears in her eyes. You're intubated. Just squeeze my hand if you understand me. I squeezed. The next few hours were a blur of tests, scans, and barely contained medical excitement. Miraculous recovery, they kept saying. Better than expected neurological function. Dr. Martinez couldn't hide her relief or her anger at what had almost happened. Marcus appeared at noon after the tubes were removed and I could speak in a hoarse whisper. He closed the door, pulled out his phone, and played me a recording. My father's voice filled the room. Let her go. We won't pay for the surgery. I listened to all 23 minutes. Heard my father calculate my worth. Heard my brother lie about my wishes. Heard them sign my life away for money and mergers. 3 independent neurologists have reviewed your charts, Marcus said quietly. Dr. Jennifer Wu from Johns Hopkins, Dr. Michael Roberts from Cleveland Clinic, and Dr. Amanda Foster from Mayo. All 3 confirmed you never met the medical criteria for a DNR. I've had their reports notarized. The merger, I whispered, my voice barely there. 8 days away. March 26th. I tried to sit up, but the room spun. You need to recover, Dr. Martinez interrupted, entering with a chart. And you need to be careful. Your father's been telling everyone you have significant cognitive impairment. He's already filed for emergency guardianship. That's when I made the decision. I looked at Marcus, then at Dr. Martinez. Then we give him what he expects. Doctor, if anyone asks about my condition. She understood immediately. Significant short-term memory loss, confusion, difficulty with complex reasoning. Marcus smiled grimly. How long do you need to play impaired? 8 days. Until the shareholders' meeting. When Robert visited that afternoon, I gave him exactly what he wanted to see. I stared at him with unfocused eyes, struggling to remember his name. Dad, I said hesitantly, like I was guessing. Are you my dad? The relief on his face was obscene. Yes, sweetheart. I'm here. You've been in an accident. I don't remember. Everything's fuzzy. I let my words slur slightly. You've been taking care of me. Of course, I've been handling everything. He pulled out papers, guardianship documents. You just need to rest. Don't worry about anything complicated. I looked at the papers with manufactured confusion. I don't understand these words. They're all jumbled. Behind Robert, Dr. Martinez's jaw clenched. She'd seen my real neurological tests. My cognitive function was at 98%. For the next 3 days, I performed. When the psychiatric evaluator came, Dr. Harrison's colleague, naturally, I failed every complex reasoning test while passing just enough basic ones to avoid suspicion. I couldn't remember the date but knew my name. Couldn't solve simple math but recognized faces. Meanwhile, Marcus worked 18-hour days. Every night after visiting hours, he'd return with encrypted files on his tablet. We communicated through a secure messaging app that looked like a meditation program on my phone. Suffolk County Courthouse has authenticated the recording, he typed. Judge Patricia Loomis signed the verification. Hartford investigation? SEC investigating suspicious trades before merger announcement. Your father needs this deal to cover losses. The pieces were falling into place. Robert had been using Sullivan Medical as his personal piggy bank, assuming the merger would erase the evidence. But he needed capital to complete the deal. $15 million in capital. Guardianship hearing Monday, Marcus typed. Judge is Ronald Fitzgerald. Golfs every Sunday with your father. I smiled weakly at the nurse who entered, immediately dropping my phone and looking confused. Where am I? I asked her. Is this a hotel? She patted my hand sympathetically. Poor dear. But when she left, I picked up my phone again. Get me everything on the merger. Every document, every email. Already done, he typed back. Your access codes still work. They think you're too impaired to use them. I'm sorry, Dad. I don't remember the accident. You've been taking care of everything. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who is supposed to protect you, you'll understand why I couldn't just confront him directly. The evidence had to be ironclad, and the revelation had to be public. March 20th, Robert filed for emergency financial guardianship at 9 a.m. sharp. The petition painted me as a tragedy, beloved daughter, brilliant mind destroyed. Unable to manage the complex trust fund my mother had left behind. Significant cognitive impairment following traumatic brain injury. Requires immediate intervention to protect assets. Judge Ronald Fitzgerald, Robert's Sunday golf partner for 15 years, scheduled the hearing for March 25th, one day before the shareholders' meeting. The timing wasn't coincidental. Dr. Harrison had provided a psychiatric evaluation stating I showed severe executive dysfunction incompatible with financial decision-making. He tested me for exactly 12 minutes, most of which he spent on his phone. His report was 8 pages long. But the real revelation came from the financial documents attached to the filing. Robert had already prepared transfer paperwork for my trust fund, predated for March 25th. The money would go directly into Sullivan Medical's Emergency Operations Fund, a slush account I'd been investigating for 2 years. He's not even trying to hide it anymore, Marcus said during his official visit. We spoke in code, knowing the room was probably monitored. Your father's very concerned about your recovery. I'm grateful for his help, I replied vacantly. I don't understand why there are so many papers. Marcus placed a folder on my bedside table, ostensibly get-well cards from colleagues. Inside were affidavits from 3 nurses who'd witnessed my coherent conversations when Robert wasn't around. Each one notarized, each one stating they'd been told by administration to support the family's assessment of Miss Sullivan's condition. That evening, Robert brought in Dr. Patricia Henley, a psychiatric specialist who actually had ethics. She spent 2 hours with me, running legitimate tests. I failed them all spectacularly, but I saw her frown when comparing my responses to my brain scans. The neurological activity doesn't match the behavioral presentation, she told Robert carefully. Head injuries are unpredictable, he replied. Surely you've seen cases where the scans look better than the reality. She had, but she also requested my previous medical records, the ones from before the accident. Marcus had already ensured she'd received them, including my perfect cognitive assessments from my annual executive physical 6 months earlier. While I played the broken daughter, Marcus built our case with surgical precision. The recording from the ICU was just the beginning. By March 22nd, we had a 47-page medical file that would destroy any claim that my DNR was medically justified. Dr. Jennifer Wu from Johns Hopkins wrote, patient shows no indication meeting the criteria for withdrawal of care. Glasgow Coma Scale improved from 6 to 14 within 48 hours. Textbook recovery trajectory. Dr. Michael Roberts from Cleveland Clinic was more blunt. The DNR order signed on March 15th appears to be motivated by factors other than patient welfare. Dr. Amanda Foster from Mayo Clinic provided the killing blow. In my 30-year career, I have never seen a DNR order issued for a patient with such positive neurological indicators. This represents a severe breach of medical ethics. But the medical malpractice was just the appetizer. The main course was the HIPAA violations. Robert had shared my medical information with 6 board members, 2 merger partners, and 3 investors, all to assure them that the situation wouldn't affect the company's stability. Each unauthorized disclosure carried a $50,000 fine, but more importantly, Each violation demonstrated a pattern of treating my medical crisis as a business opportunity. Marcus had everything notarized at Suffolk County Courthouse. Judge Patricia Loomis, who had no connection to Robert's country club network, personally verified the authentication of the ICU recording. "This is prosecutable," she told Marcus off the record. "Criminal, not just civil." The FBI had also taken interest. Those suspicious trades before the merger announcement? They traced back to accounts connected to the Sullivan Foundation. Robert had been insider trading, using charity funds, expecting the merger to cover his tracks. The $15 million from my trust would have replaced what he'd stolen. We also discovered something else. Buried deep in the Sullivan medical bylaws was Article 7, Section 3. Any executive found guilty of medical malpractice or significant breach of fiduciary duty shall be removed from position within 24 hours of board determination. It required a 2/3 vote. With 9 board members, we needed 6. Marcus had quietly reached out to 3 independent board members, Dr. Elizabeth Chang, Professor Michael Torres, and Sandra Williams, all of whom had been growing concerned about Robert's increasingly aggressive tactics. They agreed to review our evidence before the shareholders' meeting. By March 23rd, we had everything: medical evidence, legal documentation, financial proof of embezzlement, and a room full of witnesses scheduled to gather in 3 days. The shareholders' meeting was set for March 26, 2 p.m., at the Four Seasons Boston Grand Ballroom. 200 of healthcare's most powerful investors would gather to witness what Robert called the deal of the decade. Hartford Healthcare Systems would pay $500 million for a 60% stake in Sullivan Medical, creating the largest healthcare network in New England. The presentation deck was 90 slides of triumphant projections. Robert had been rehearsing for weeks. The Wall Street Journal, Boston Globe, and Bloomberg were all confirmed to attend. This wasn't just a business deal. It was Robert's coronation as the King of New England medicine. What the attendees didn't know was that the SEC had opened a formal investigation 3 days earlier. Hartford's due diligence team had also started asking uncomfortable questions about the Sullivan Foundation's financials. On March 24th, I made a calculated move. I called Robert from my hospital bed, sounding weak and confused. "Daddy," I chirped, "the nice lawyer man says there's an important meeting tomorrow. Something about pay. Don't worry about it, sweetheart. I'll handle everything at the guardianship hearing." "Oh, okay. Will you be having another meeting? You always have such important meetings." He chuckled. That patronizing laugh I'd heard my whole life. "Yes, princess. Tuesday is Daddy's big day. The biggest deal ever. Can I come? I want to see you be important." There was a pause, then the calculation in his voice. "Of course, you can come, sweetheart. Everyone should see that you're being well cared for. Sit in the front row and support your family." Perfect. He wanted me there as a prop. The tragically impaired daughter whose medical crisis he was so nobly managing. The optics would be perfect for him, the devoted father who could handle personal tragedy while still delivering corporate victories. Marcus filed the paperwork for my attendance as part of my therapeutic reintegration into familiar environments. Dr. Martinez supported it with a note about positive stimulation for recovery. This merger would be his crowning achievement, or so he thought. They'd witnessed something all right. March 25th, 10:12 a.m. While Robert celebrated the successful guardianship hearing with champagne at the Ritz-Carlton bar, I sat in my hospital room with Marcus, signing the most important documents of my life. Judge Fitzgerald had ruled exactly as expected, full financial guardianship to Robert, effective immediately. But we'd anticipated this. Marcus had filed an emergency appeal with the state Supreme Court 90 minutes before the hearing even started, citing judicial conflict of interest. The appeal would be heard in 72 hours, long after the shareholders' meeting. "Your father's already initiated the trust fund transfer," Marcus said, showing me his laptop screen. $15 million scheduled to move at 9 a.m. tomorrow. "Let it happen," I said, signing my name with perfect precision on a document titled Refusal of Guardianship, Mental Competency Declaration. A notary public, one with no connection to Sullivan Medical, witnessed and sealed it. We'd also sent encrypted emails to 3 independent board members with a simple message: please attend tomorrow's meeting with an open mind. Documentation of critical compliance failures will be presented. Dr. Elizabeth Chang replied within an hour, I'll be there. Professor Michael Torres, concerned by recent patterns, will attend. Sandra Williams, about time someone spoke up. 3 guaranteed. We needed 3 more for the 2/3 majority. Robert called me at 11 p.m., drunk on his success. Tomorrow, princess, everything changes. Your mother never understood vision. She just hoarded money. But I'm going to build something that matters. That's nice, Daddy, I said, injecting confusion into my voice. Will there be balloons? He laughed. Sure, sweetheart. All the balloons you want. After he hung up, I looked at Marcus. He just admitted to seeing my mother's money as his to spend. Recorded, Marcus confirmed, added to the file. Dr. Martinez stopped by at midnight with my discharge papers. Medically cleared, she said loudly for any listening ears. Then, quieter, give him hell. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I reviewed every piece of evidence, every document, every recording, 47 pages of medical testimony, 23 minutes of audio, for confirmed HIPAA violations, 3 years of embezzlement documentation. Tomorrow, either I lose everything or he does. There's no middle ground. At 6 a.m. on March 26th, I put on my Navy suit, the one my mother had bought me for my first day as legal director. Time to end this. March 26th, 2 p.m. The Grand Ballroom at the Four Seasons Boston was a monument to corporate power. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden light over 200 of healthcare's elite. The Hartford healthcare delegation occupied the entire left section, 12 executives who'd flown in from Connecticut. The Wall Street Journal had sent their senior healthcare reporter. Bloomberg's camera crew was setting up for the live stream. I sat in the front row, wearing my Navy suit and what everyone assumed was a vacant smile. Robert had positioned me perfectly, close enough for sympathy optics, far enough that I wouldn't disrupt anything. James sat beside me, uncomfortable in his CFO finery, occasionally patting my hand like I was a child. Just sit. Quietly, he whispered. It'll all be over soon. He had no idea how right he was. Robert took the stage at 2:15, commanding the room with practiced authority. The presentation screen showed Sullivan Medical Group's logo, merged with Hartford Healthcare's, a promise of the future. Ladies and gentlemen, today we make history, he began. $500 million, 3,000 doctors, 12 hospitals expanding to 20. This merger isn't just business, it's a revolution in patient care. The audience applauded. Several board members nodded approvingly. The Hartford executives smiled their corporate smiles. For 35 minutes, Robert painted his masterpiece. Revenue projections that soared. Efficiency improvements that would transform medicine. The Sullivan Foundation's charitable work, $40 million serving communities in need. I watched him work the room, this man who'd signed my death warrant for money. He mentioned my mother once, briefly, building on the pharmaceutical legacy of my late wife, then moved on to his own accomplishments. At minute 35, he reached the climax. Before we sign these historic documents, I want to acknowledge my family's support through recent challenges. My daughter Fiona's recovery from her tragic accident reminds us that healthcare is personal, not just professional. 200 faces turned to me with practiced sympathy. Cameras focused. This was his moment of perfect orchestration. The devoted father, the corporate titan, the healthcare visionary. I stood up. Thank you, Dad, I said, my voice carrying perfectly in the acoustically designed room. Clear, sharp, not a trace of impairment. I do have something to add about healthcare being personal. Robert's smile froze. Sweetheart, you should rest. I'm perfectly rested. I walked toward the stage, Marcus rising from his seat in row 3 with a leather folder. In fact, I have a medical ethics concern to raise before these documents are signed. The room went silent. 200 pairs of eyes turned to me. Robert's face flushed red. You're not well, sweetheart. The accident. I'm well enough to know what you did in that ICU room, Dad. The Wall Street Journal reporter pulled out her phone, already typing. The Bloomberg camera swiveled toward me. The show was about to begin. The transformation in the room was instant. The sympathetic smiles vanished, replaced by the sharp attention of people who smelled blood in the water. These weren't just investors. They were sharks, and they'd just detected weakness. "Security," Robert called out, but his voice cracked slightly. "My daughter is confused." "I'm not confused." I reached the stage stairs, climbing them with deliberate precision. "I'm cognitively intact, legally competent, and fully aware that you signed a Do Not Resuscitate order while I was in a coma to steal my $15 million trust fund." Gasps rippled through the audience. The Hartford delegation exchanged alarmed glances. One executive was already texting frantically. "These are delusions from her head injury," Robert stammered, but sweat was beading on his forehead. "Someone please." "Marcus," I called out. "The evidence, please." Marcus walked down the center aisle like a prosecutor approaching the bench. He held up the folder for everyone to see. 47 pages of medical documentation, 3 independent neurological assessments, and 23 minutes of audio recorded in the ICU at Massachusetts General Hospital. "You can't record without consent." Mitchell Barnes, Robert's lawyer, stood up from the board section. "That's illegal." "Actually," Marcus said calmly. "Miss Sullivan provided prior written consent for medical advocacy recordings 3 years ago, notarized, filed with the state. Completely legal under Massachusetts law." I took the microphone from the podium. My father stood frozen, calculating his options. Run, stay, fight, lie. "Before we play the recording," I said, addressing the room, "let me establish the medical facts. On March 15th, I was in a car accident, traumatic brain injury, Glasgow coma scale of 6. By March 17th, that had improved to 14. 3 independent neurologists from Johns Hopkins, Cleveland Clinic, and Mayo have confirmed I showed a 70% chance of full recovery." I clicked the presentation remote, replacing Robert's merger slides with medical documents. Yet on March 15th, just 4 hours after my accident, my father signed a DNR order. The reasoning? Let me quote from the recording you're about to hear. Marcus connected his phone to the sound system. The ballroom's perfect acoustics carried every word. "Let her go peacefully. We won't pay for experimental treatments when that money could save the hospital." Then, clearer, $15 million. "Do you know how many pediatric cancer patients that could help?" And finally, the killing blow, the trust passes to her father if she dies without children or a spouse. The room erupted. Board members shot to their feet. The Hartford executives were already heading for the exits. Someone shouted, "This is medical murder." Robert grabbed for the microphone, but 2 security guards, the same ones he'd called for me, stepped forward. They looked confused, unsure who they were supposed to be protecting or removing. "This is taken out of context," Robert shouted over the chaos. "Then let's play all 23 minutes, I said calmly. "Let everyone hear the full context." The Hartford team left at minute 37. The merger died at minute 38. The full recording played like a funeral dirge for Robert Sullivan's empire. Every word, every calculation, every cold dismissal of my life echoed through the grand ballroom's premium sound system. "She's stable now, but these things can deteriorate," Robert's voice said. "Better to let nature take its course." Dr. Martinez's voice, professional but clearly distressed. "Mr. Sullivan, your daughter is showing remarkable neurological improvement." "Doctor, I understand medicine. I run 12 hospitals. Sometimes the kindest thing is to let go." The audience listened in horrified silence as my father discussed my life like a line item on a budget. Several people were recording with their phones. The Bloomberg camera captured everything. But the worst part came at minute 18. James's voice, "Dad, maybe we should wait." And Robert's chilling response, "You want to keep your CFO position in the merged company, don't you? Then stop pretending you care. We both know you need this deal to cover your debts." James, sitting in the front row, had gone utterly pale. His complicity was now public record. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Then Sandra Williams from the board stood up. "I move for an emergency board meeting under Article 7, Section 3 of the corporate bylaws." Seconded. Dr. Elizabeth Chong said immediately, "You can't do this during a shareholders meeting." Robert protested. Actually, we can, Professor Michael Torres said, standing. When evidence of medical malpractice by a senior executive is presented, the board has a fiduciary duty to act immediately. The 9 board members huddled at the side of the room. Robert stood alone at the podium, his merger presentation still glowing behind him. A monument to what would never be. "This is a setup," he cried into the microphone, desperately addressing the remaining audience. "My daughter is obviously being manipulated." "By whom?" I asked, my voice cutting through the rising panic. "The 3 independent neurologists? The Suffolk County Court that authenticated the recording? The FBI agents investigating your insider trading through the Sullivan Foundation." That last revelation sent another shockwave through the room. Several investors were already heading for exits, phones pressed to ears, no doubt calling their lawyers. The Wall Street Journal reporter approached me. "Miss Sullivan, are you confirming FBI involvement?" "I'm confirming that my father tried to kill me for money," I said clearly, knowing every word would be in tomorrow's headline. "Everything else will come out in due course." The board reconvened. Sandra Williams spoke for them. By unanimous vote of 8-1, Mr. Sullivan voting for himself, Robert Sullivan is immediately removed as CEO of Sullivan Medical Group for gross violations of medical ethics and fiduciary duty. The Hartford delegation's lead executive stood up. Hartford Healthcare formally withdraws from all merger negotiations, effective immediately. By the time security escorted Robert from his own celebration, Sullivan Medical Group stock had dropped 47%. $230 million in market cap evaporated in less than an hour. "This is a coup," Robert cried desperately. "This is my company, my legacy." "No," I said quietly. "It was built on my mother's money, and it dies with your greed." The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within 2 hours of the recording being played, Massachusetts General Hospital suspended Dr. Harrison's medical privileges. The Massachusetts Medical Board launched a formal inquiry. The state attorney general's office opened a criminal investigation. For HIPAA violations at $50,000 each meant $200,000 in personal fines for Robert, and that was just the federal penalties. Each board member he'd illegally informed about my medical condition could also sue for being given information that made them potentially liable. By 6 p.m., 8 of the 9 board members had submitted their votes to remove Robert permanently. Marcus had prepared everything. The moment the board voted, he filed the documentation with the Secretary of State. He also filed criminal complaints with the Boston Police Department for attempted murder through medical negligence. "The evidence is overwhelming," Detective Patricia Murphy told me that evening. "The recording alone would be enough, but with the medical documentation, your father's looking at potential attempted murder charges." The FBI arrived at Sullivan Medical Group headquarters at 7 p.m. with a warrant. They seized servers, documents, and froze the accounts of the Sullivan Foundation. The $40 million in charitable donations would be traced transaction by transaction. James found me in the hotel lobby after the meeting, his face gray with shock and shame. "Fiona, you signed the DNR as a witness," I said simply. "You lied about my wishes. I thought you were going to die anyway." Dad said the doctor's dad lied, and you chose to believe him because it was easier than standing up to him. He pulled out his phone, showing me a message. "I've already submitted my resignation as CFO. I'll testify if you need me to. About everything. The fraud, the insider trading, all of it. Your testimony won't save you from prosecution," Marcus informed him, ever the realist. "But cooperation might reduce your sentence." James nodded, looking older than his 35 years. "I know. I'm sorry, Fiona. I should have protected you." "Yes," I said. "You should have." By market close, Sullivan Medical Group had lost 47% of its value. The board appointed Dr. Sarah Martinez as interim CEO, the same doctor who'd fought against my DNR. There was poetic justice in that. Article 7, Section 3. Any executive guilty of medical malpractice shall be removed within 24 hours. Robert Sullivan's removal was complete in less than 6. The Boston Globe's morning edition ran with a headline that would define Robert Sullivan's legacy: Medical CEO's DNR Scandal, Attempted Murder for Millions. The Wall Street Journal was more measured, but equally damaging. Sullivan Medical Group CEO removed after recording reveals attempt to hasten daughter's death for inheritance. Bloomberg's coverage included the video from the shareholders' meeting. My clear, composed revelation contrasted with Robert's desperate denials. The clip went viral within hours. 3 million views by noon had DNR scandal trending nationally. But it wasn't just the major outlets. Medical ethics blogs dissected every second of the recording. Legal analysts debated the criminal charges on cable news. Reddit's legal advice forum had a mega thread with over 10,000 comments, many from healthcare workers sharing their own horror stories about profit-driven medical decisions. The Massachusetts Medical Board issued an unprecedented statement by noon. The actions described in the Sullivan case represent the most egregious violation of medical ethics we have investigated. We are reviewing all DNR orders issued at Sullivan Medical Group facilities in the past 5 years. 47 cases were flagged for immediate review. 3 Sullivan medical hospitals announced they were severing their affiliation agreements by day's end. The nursing union called for a vote of no confidence. Medical students at Harvard started a petition to remove Robert's name from the Sullivan Auditorium. He donated $5 million to build it with foundation money, of course. The FBI expanded their investigation. The insider trading was just the beginning. They found shell companies in the Caymans, bribes disguised as consulting fees, and nearly $30 million siphoned from the Sullivan Foundation over 7 years. Dr. Martinez, as interim CEO, held an emergency press conference at 4 p.m. Sullivan Medical Group is committed to complete transparency and ethical reform, she announced. We are cooperating fully with all investigations and implementing immediate changes to our oversight procedures. Every DNR order in our system will be reviewed by an independent panel. A reporter asked about me. Will Miss Sullivan be returning to her position as legal director? Miss Sullivan is focusing on her recovery and her own legal practice, Dr. Martinez said carefully. We respect her decision to distance herself from the organization during this transition. Distance myself? That was diplomatic. The truth was, I never wanted to set foot in a Sullivan medical building again. By market close, the stock had stabilized at 53% of its pre-scandal value. Robert's personal holdings, once worth $80 million, were now worth $42 million and frozen by federal order. By the time the news cycle ended, Robert Sullivan wasn't just ruined. He was radioactive. No hospital in America would ever hire him again. James came to my apartment 3 days after the shareholders' meeting, looking like he hadn't slept since. He carried a box of documents and a resignation letter that was already public knowledge. I've been thinking about Mom, he said, standing in my doorway because I hadn't invited him in. What she would think of what we became. What you and Dad became, I corrected. I never changed. No, you didn't. He set the box down. These are all the records I kept. Off-the-books transactions, recorded conversations, emails. Dad doesn't know I saved 3 years' worth. My insurance policy, I called it. And you're giving them to me now after I almost died? His voice broke. I should have protected you. In that ICU room, when Dad was signing those papers, I knew it was wrong. But I was so deep in debt, so dependent on his approval that I convinced myself that your life was worth less than my debt. He met my eyes for the first time. And I'll live with that for the rest of my life. But I can at least try to make it right. I'll testify against him. Against the whole network of corruption. I'll take whatever sentence they give me. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. He'd lost weight. His hands shook slightly. The golden voice CFO was gone, replaced by someone who'd finally seen himself clearly and couldn't stand the view. The $2 million I loaned you, I said. What happened to it? Gambling debts. Dad's addiction isn't substances, it's power. Mine was trying to keep up with his lifestyle. He pulled out his phone, showing me a wire transfer confirmation. I liquidated everything. My house, my cars, my portfolio. You'll have your $2 million back by end of business today. And then I disappear. Change my name. Maybe start over somewhere nobody knows the Sullivan name. He turned to leave, then stopped. I know you can't forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me. But I wanted you to know that when I said you should have been allowed to die, I was really talking about the part of me that needed to die, the part that chose him over you. I didn't forgive him, but I took the box. You should have protected you, he said one more time. Yes, I agreed. You should have. March 27th, 9 a.m. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Sullivan Medical Group headquarters felt like a courtroom. 8 board members sat around the mahogany table that Robert had personally selected to project power. His empty chair at the head looked like a void. I attended via video link. Marcus had advised against any physical presence that could be construed as seeking control. I watched from my laptop as the board systematically dismantled Robert Sullivan's empire. Motion to formally terminate Robert Sullivan as CEO, effective immediately, Sandra Williams announced. Seconded, said Dr. Chang. The vote was 8-0. Robert, attempting to join virtually from his lawyer's office, was denied access. Motion to revoke all of Robert Sullivan's signing authorities and board positions. Another 8-0 vote. Motion to appoint Dr. Sarah Martinez as interim CEO for a minimum term of 1 year. 8-0. Dr. Martinez accepted with gravity. My first act will be to establish an independent ethics committee to review all executive decisions from the past 5 years. Professor Torres raised the next issue. Ms. Sullivan, the board would like to offer you the position of Chief Legal Officer with full autonomy to investigate and reform our compliance procedures. I appreciate the offer, I said clearly, but I must decline. Sullivan Medical Group needs to rebuild without any Sullivan family members in leadership positions. The name itself is tainted. Then we should consider rebranding, Sandra Williams suggested. Distance ourselves from the Sullivan name entirely. They would eventually vote to become Commonwealth Health Systems. Robert's name would be scrubbed from every building, every document, every press release. Erased like he tried to erase me. There's one more matter, Dr. Martinez said. The trust fund that Mr. Sullivan attempted to access, the $15 million. It remains in my mother's trust, untouched, I confirmed. I'll be establishing a foundation for traumatic brain injury research and supporting families dealing with medical malpractice. It will have no connection to this organization. Mitchell Barnes, Robert's former lawyer, had already fled to his car when the FBI arrived. He would later be disbarred for his role in facilitating the attempted guardianship fraud. The meeting ended with a moment of silence. Not for Robert, but for what Sullivan Medical Group could have been if greed hadn't poisoned it from the top. I didn't want his throne, I told them before disconnecting. I wanted my freedom. Today, we both got what we deserved. The board minutes would record it as the shortest executive termination in corporate history. Total time from violation exposure to complete removal, 18 hours. I saw Robert one last time 3 days after the board meeting. He appeared at my apartment building at 10 p.m., looking like he'd aged a decade in 72 hours. His Armani suit was wrinkled. His silver hair, always perfectly styled, hung limp. The security guard called up to warn me, but I let him in. I wanted to see what remained of the man who tried to kill me. He stood in my living room, looking at the photos on my mantle. All of my mother, none of him. I've lost everything, he said, his voice hollow. 7 board positions gone. Personal assets frozen. Barbara filed for divorce this morning, and she's taking half of whatever the FBI doesn't seize. Barbara, my stepmother, who'd married him for money. There was poetic justice in her leaving him the moment the money disappeared. The FBI says I'm looking at 20 years, he continued. Insider trading, embezzlement, wire fraud. They haven't decided whether to pursue the attempted murder charge. I said nothing. Let him talk. Let him feel what I'd felt in that coma. Helpless, voiceless, at the mercy of others. I had debts, he said suddenly. $30 million to people who don't accept bankruptcy as an excuse. The merger was supposed to clear everything. Your trust fund was Plan B. So you chose your gambling addiction over your daughter's life. For a moment, his mask cracked completely. I just wanted to protect the legacy. Your mother built something beautiful, and I turned it into something powerful. I thought if I could just get through this crisis, you wouldn't have let me die. The words hung between us like a blade. I was desperate, he whispered. The Russians said they'd kill me if I didn't pay by April. I thought. I convinced myself you wouldn't want to live as a vegetable, that the money would do more good. Stop. I stood up, facing the man who gave me life, and then tried to take it. You weren't thinking about my wishes or the greater good. You were thinking about yourself. You've always only thought about yourself. He aged another year in that moment, shoulders sagging. The mighty Robert Sullivan reduced to a broken old man in an expensive suit. I know, he said quietly. I know what I am now. I just wanted to protect. No, you wanted to survive, and you were willing to sacrifice me to do it. I walked to the door, opening it. Get out. If you contact me again, I'll pursue the attempted murder charges myself. He shuffled toward the door, then stopped. I'm sorry, Fiona. Desperation doesn't excuse evil, I said. Even monsters have reasons. That doesn't make them less monstrous. For the first time in 40 years, Robert Sullivan had no title after his name. The trust fund my mother left me remained untouched. $15 million that Robert had been willing to kill for. On April 1st, I sat in the conference room of Hartley and Associates, my mother's original law firm, signing the documents that would transform blood money into hope. The Eleanor Sullivan Foundation for Neurological Recovery, Marcus read from the incorporation papers, dedicated to funding treatment for traumatic brain injury patients whose insurance has denied coverage. My mother's name would live on, but not in the way Robert had corrupted it. $5 million goes to establishing the fund, I explained to the lawyers. $5 million for research grants at Massachusetts General, specifically to Dr. Martinez's neurology department, and $5 million for a legal aid fund helping families fight wrongful DNR orders. And the earnings from the principal? Full scholarships for medical students who commit to working in underserved communities. My mother would have wanted that. We structured it so no Sullivan family member could ever control or benefit from the foundation. An independent board of medical ethicists and patient advocates would oversee every dollar. That afternoon, I received a call from Dr. Martinez. 3 families have already reached out. Their loved ones had DNR orders signed under suspicious circumstances at Sullivan facilities. Your foundation could help them get justice. Then we start with them, I said. James's $2 million arrived as promised along with a note. This doesn't absolve me. Nothing can. But maybe it can help someone else. I added it to the foundation. By the end of the week, we'd received over 200 applications for assistance. Families who'd been told their loved ones were too expensive to save. Patients who'd been written off because their insurance had caps. People like me who'd been valued in dollars instead of heartbeats. The first grant went to Maria Gonzalez, a 19-year-old college student whose family was told they needed to consider other options after her motorcycle accident. With our funding, she received the experimental treatment her insurance denied. She's walking today. The second went to Thomas Chin, 72, whose children were pressured to sign a DNR because, at his age, quality of life would be minimal. He's now playing piano at his granddaughter's recital. Each success was a repudiation of Robert's philosophy. Each recovery was proof that some things matter more than money. My mother's money would heal, not harm. The foundation's motto, engraved on a plaque in the waiting room of our first clinic, every life has value beyond measure. Eleanor Sullivan, 1961 to 2014. By September, I'd established my own practice, Sullivan Legal Services. Keeping my name to remind myself why I fight. We specialized in medical malpractice and patients' rights, particularly cases involving coerced DNR orders and premature end-of-life decisions. My first client was Dorothy Patterson, an 82-year-old whose son tried to invoke power of attorney to stop her cancer treatment and access her pension fund. We won. She's cancer-free today, and her son is serving 3 years for elder abuse. The office was small, just me, 2 paralegals, and Marcus as senior counsel. But we chose our cases carefully, taking only those where financial motivation corrupted medical decisions. We didn't chase ambulances. We chased justice. You could make 10 times more in corporate law, a Harvard classmate told me over coffee. I've seen what corporate law protects, I replied. I'd rather sleep at night. We kept a simple rule. We never took cases involving Commonwealth Health Systems, formerly Sullivan Medical Group. They needed to rebuild without any Sullivan shadow, and I needed to build something entirely my own. Dr. Martinez sent updates occasionally. The company had stabilized under her leadership, implementing the strictest ethical guidelines in the industry. Every DNR order now required 3 independent physicians' agreement and was automatically reviewed by an ethics board. The media attention faded after a few months, replaced by other scandals, other betrayals, but the changes remained. The Massachusetts Medical Ethics Board instituted the Sullivan Protocol, mandatory recording of all DNR discussions, automatic review of any order signed within 72 hours of admission, and criminal penalties for financial coercion. My apartment walls filled with thank you letters from clients, photographs of recoveries deemed impossible, and one framed document, the Massachusetts State Bar's Award for Excellence in Medical Ethics Advocacy. Robert's name was nowhere in my new life. I'd taken his attempt to erase me and turned it into purpose. October 2024. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters as Robert Sullivan was sentenced to 2 years probation for HIPAA violations. The federal prosecutors had decided not to pursue attempted murder charges, citing insufficient evidence of premeditation, but the civil penalties were crushing: $1.2 million in fines, complete liquidation of assets, and a lifetime ban from serving on any medical board. I didn't attend the sentencing. I was in court myself that day, winning a $12 million settlement for the Hendricks family, whose daughter had been denied experimental treatment by her insurance company while the hospital's CFO coincidentally bought stock in the competing treatment manufacturer. Sullivan Medical Group, now Commonwealth Health Systems, had recovered to 60% of its pre-scandal valuation. The rebranding was complete. Robert's portrait had been removed from every building, donated to a warehouse where forgotten executives go to gather dust. James had disappeared completely after testifying. His cooperation reduced his sentence to 6 months house arrest and 3 years probation. The last I heard, he was working as an accounting tutor in Portland under an assumed name, teaching students about ethical financial practices, ironic penance for his sins. The Sullivan Protocol had been adopted by 3 states, with more considering legislation. 47 suspicious DNR cases had been reviewed, resulting in 11 criminal prosecutions and 31 civil settlements. Families who'd lost loved ones to financial calculations finally had recourse. The Eleanor Sullivan Foundation had distributed $8 million in grants, funding treatment for 63 patients who'd been written off as economically unviable. 58 were still alive. Their families sent us Christmas cards with photos of graduations, weddings, grandchildren, life events that almost never happened. Dr. Martinez invited me to speak at Commonwealth Health's annual ethics symposium. I declined. Some bridges shouldn't be rebuilt, even with the best intentions. The FBI investigation had uncovered the full extent of Robert's crimes: $43 million embezzled over 9 years, insider trading that netted $6 million in illegal gains, and bribes totaling $2 million to various officials. The Russian gambling connection led to a separate federal investigation that would eventually indict 6 others in an international money laundering scheme. By every metric, justice had been served. Robert was destroyed, the corrupt system reformed, and victims compensated. So why did I still check my locks 3 times every night? The letter arrived on November 15, 2024, forwarded through Marcus's office with a Connecticut postmark. Robert's handwriting, once bold and commanding on billion-dollar contracts, now trembled across cheap notebook paper. Fiona, it began. I know you said no contact, but I need you to know something before I die. The doctors say pancreatic cancer. For months, maybe 6. Ironic, isn't it? All those hospitals I controlled, and none of them can save me now. I've been living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Hartford, working as a night janitor at a medical clinic. They don't know who I am. It's peaceful, cleaning up after real healers. I think about that ICU room every night. I hear my voice on that recording. Let her go. And I understand now what I really was, a father who valued money over his daughter's heartbeat. There's no forgiveness for that. I'm not asking for any. Your mother would be proud of what you've built. The foundation, the practice, the changes you forced onto the industry. You became everything I pretended to be. Powerful, principled, untouchable. I've left what little remains, about $400,000 after the settlements, to your foundation. It won't absolve me, but maybe it can save someone else's daughter. I won't contact you again. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what I lost. Not money or power or reputation. I lost the only thing that actually mattered, my daughter's love. You were right. Desperation doesn't excuse evil. Robert. I read it twice, then handed it to Marcus. How do you want to respond? He asked. I pulled out my legal stationery and wrote 3 words. No contact means no contact. I had Marcus send it through his office along with a cease and desist order. 2 weeks later, a $400,000 donation appeared in the Eleanor Sullivan Foundation's account from Anonymous Hartford. I knew who it was from. I accepted it because the money could save lives, but I added a notation in our records. Donation accepted without acknowledgement or absolution. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. Some bridges, once burned by betrayal, should stay ash. Robert would die alone in Connecticut 4 months later. I learned about it from a small obituary in the Hartford Courant that didn't mention his former titles, his medical empire, or his family. Just, Robert Sullivan, 58, janitor. I didn't attend the funeral. Neither did anyone else. 2 days after Robert's death in March 2025, Marcus uncovered the full truth during the final FBI document release. The gambling debts weren't just about money, Marcus explained, sliding a folder across my desk. They were about survival. The Russian mob had photographs. Robert at their casino in 2019, 2020, 2021. But look at the dates. Each photo coincided with your mother's death anniversary. Every year on the day she died, Robert flew to Atlantic City and lost millions, trying to feel something other than guilt. There's more, Marcus said quietly. The FBI found his personal journals in a storage unit. He wrote about your mother's death, how he'd pushed her to delayed treatment because he was negotiating a hospital acquisition. She waited 3 months. By then, the cancer had metastasized. I stared at the pages of Robert's handwriting, confessing to a guilt that had eaten him alive for 10 years. He'd killed my mother through greed, then nearly killed me for the same reason. He chose his addiction over his daughter's life, I said, repeating what I told him months ago. But now I understood. The addiction wasn't gambling. It was trying to escape the guilt of killing the only person who'd ever truly loved him. The Russians knew about your mother, Marcus continued. They used it as leverage. Pay us or we'll tell your daughter what really happened to Eleanor. The final piece clicked into place. Robert hadn't just tried to kill me for money. He tried to kill me to keep his secret. If I died, the truth about my mother would have died too. He chose his addiction over his daughter's life, I said again. But this time I understood. He'd been addicted to hiding from the truth. Even monsters have reasons. That doesn't make them less monstrous. I took the journals and the FBI report and locked them in my safe. Someday I might read Robert's full confession. Someday I might understand how a man could kill the 2 people he claimed to love most. But not today. Today I had a client meeting. A young father whose wife's hospital wanted to discontinue life support because their insurance had lapsed. His wife had an 80% chance of recovery with proper treatment. I would make sure she got it. Because that's what Eleanor Sullivan's daughter does. She saves the people others would let die for money. Thank you for witnessing my story. Sometimes the greatest betrayals come from those closest to us. But evidence, preparation, and choosing the right moment can deliver justice. What would you have done if your own family tried to erase you for profit? Have you ever had to strategically plan your response to betrayal? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to hear what you think. And if this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of people finding their power.